Nurse, would you be willing to say how you were feeling about the cancer? Husband, after a brief silence, not very good. The words good and bad are often used to describe feelings when people have yet to identify the specific emotion they are experiencing. Expressing his feelings more precisely would help this patient with the emotional connection he was seeking with his wife. Nurse, encouraging him to move toward more precision. You scared about dying? Husband, no, not yet. Notice the nurse's indirect guess does not hamper the continued flow of dialogue. Nurse, because this patient isn't able to verbalize his internal experience easily, the nurse continues to support him in the process. Do you feel angry about dying? Husband, no, not angry. Nurse, at this point, after 2 indirect guesses, the nurse decides to express her own feelings. Well, now I'm puzzled about what you may be feeling, and wonder if you can tell me. Husband, I reckon, I'm thinking how she'll do without me. Nurse, oh, are you worried she may not be able to handle her life without you? Husband, yes, worried she'll miss me. Nurse, she is aware that dying patients often hang on due to worry over those they are leaving behind, and sometimes need reassurance that loved ones can accept their death before they can let themselves go. Do you want to hear how your wife feels when you say that? Husband, yes. Here the wife joined the conversation, in the continued presence of the nurse. The couple began to express themselves openly to each other. In this dialogue, the wife began with a complaint about the physical therapist. However, after a series of exchanges during which she felt empathically received, she was able to determine that what she really sought was a deeper connection with her husband during this critical stage of their lives. Exercise 5. Receiving empathically versus non-empathically. To see whether in agreement about the verbal expression of empathy, please circle the number in front of each statement in which person B is responding empathically to what is going on within person A. 1. Person A, how could I do something so stupid? Person B, nobody is perfect, you're too hard on yourself. 2. Person A, if you ask me, we ought to ship all these immigrants back to where they came from. Person B, do you really think that would solve anything? 3. Person A, you aren't God. 4. Person B, are you feeling frustrated because you would like me to admit that there can be other ways of interpreting this matter? 4. Person A, I think that you take me for granted. I wonder how you would manage without me. Person B, that's not true. I don't take you for granted. 5. Person A, how could you say a thing like that to me? Person B, are you feeling hurt because I said that? 6. Person A, I'm furious with my husband. He's never around when I need him. Person B, you think he should be around more than he is. 7. Person A, I'm disgusted with how heavy I'm getting. Person B, perhaps jogging would help. 8. Person A, I've been a nervous wreck planning for my daughter's wedding. Her fiancé's family is not helping. About every day they change their minds about the kind of wedding they would like. Person B, so you're feeling nervous about how to make arrangements and would appreciate it if your future in-laws could be more aware of the complications their indecision creates for you. 9. Person A, when my relatives come without letting me know ahead of time, I feel invaded. It reminds me of how my parents used to disregard my needs and would plan things for me. Person B, I know how you feel. I used to feel that way too. 10. Person A, I'm disappointed with your performance. I would have liked your department to double your production last month. Person B, I understand that you are disappointed, but we have had many absences due to illness. Here are my responses for exercise 5. 1. I didn't circle this one because I see person B giving reassurance to person A rather than empathically receiving what person A is expressing. 2. I see person B attempting to educate person A rather than empathically receiving what person A is expressing. 3. If you circled this we are in agreement. I see person B empathically receiving what person A is expressing. 4. I didn't circle this one because I see person B disagreeing and defending rather than empathically receiving what is going on in person A. 5. I see person B taking responsibility for person A's feelings rather than empathically receiving what is going on in person. An example of an empathic response might be, are you feeling hurt because you would have liked me to agree to do what you requested? 6. If you circled this we are in partial agreement. I see person B receiving person A's thoughts. However, I believe we connect more deeply when we receive the feelings and needs being expressed rather than the thoughts. Therefore, I would have preferred it if person B had said, so you're feeling furious because you would like him to be around more than he is. 7. I didn't circle this one because I see person B giving advice rather than empathically receiving what is going on in person A. 8. If you circled this we are in agreement. I see person B empathically receiving what is going on in person A. 9. I didn't circle this one because I see person B assuming they understand and talking about their own feelings rather than empathically receiving what is going on in person A. 10. I didn't circle this one because I see person B starting by focusing on person A's feelings but then shifting to explaining. Chapter 8. C. The power of empathy. Empathy that heals. Carl Rogers described the impact of empathy on its recipients. When someone really hears you without passing judgment on you, without trying to take responsibility for you, without trying to mold you, it feels damn good. When I have been listened to and when I have been heard, I am able to reperceive my world in a new way and to go on. It is astonishing how elements that seem insoluble become soluble when someone listens, how confusions that seem irremediable turn into relatively clear flowing streams when one is heard. Empathy allows us to reperceive our world in a new way and to go on. One of my favorite stories about empathy comes from the principal of an innovative school. She had returned after lunch one day to find Millie, an elementary school student, sitting dejectedly in her office waiting to see her. She sat down next to Millie, who began, Mrs. Anderson, have you ever had a week when everything you did hurt somebody else, and you never intended to hurt anyone at all? Don't just do something. Quote. Yes, the principal replied, I think I understand, whereupon Millie proceeded to describe her week. By now, the principal related, I was quite late for a very important meeting, still had my coat on, and anxious not to keep a room full of people waiting, and so I asked, Millie, what can I do for you? Millie reached over, took both my shoulders in her hands, looked me straight in the eyes, and said very firmly, Mrs. Anderson, I don't want you to do anything, I just want you to listen. This one of the most significant moments of learning in my life, taught to me by a child, so I thought, never mind the room full of adults waiting for me. Millie and I moved over to a bench that afforded us more privacy and sat, my arm around her shoulders, her head on my chest, and her arm around my waist, while she talked until she was done. And you know, it didn't take that long. One of the most satisfying aspects of my work is to hear how individuals have used NDC to strengthen their ability to connect empathically with others. My friend Lawrence, who lives in Switzerland, described how upset she felt when her 6-year-old son had stormed away angrily while she was still talking to him. Isabel, her 10-year-old daughter, who had accompanied her to a recent NVC workshop, remarked, "So you're really angry, Mom. You'd like for him to talk when he's angry and not run off." Lawrence marveled at how, upon hearing Isabel's words, she felt an immediate diminishing of tension, and was subsequently able to be more understanding with her son when he returned. A college instructor described how relationships between students and faculty had been affected when several members of the faculty learned to listen empathically and to express themselves more vulnerably and honestly. The students opened up more and more and told us about the various personal problems that were interfering with their studies. The more they talked about it, the more work they were able to complete. Even though this kind of listening took a lot of our time, we were glad to spend it in this way. Unfortunately, the dean got upset. He said we were not counselors and should spend more time teaching and less time talking with the students. When I asked how the faculty had dealt with this, the instructor replied, "We empathized with the dean's concern. We heard that he felt worried and wanted to know that we weren't getting involved in things we couldn't handle. We also heard that he needed reassurance. That the time spent on talking wasn't cutting into our teaching responsibilities. He seemed relieved by the way we listened to him. We continued to talk with the students because we could see that the more we listened to them, the better they did in their studies. It's harder to empathize with those who appear to possess more power, status, or resources. When we work in a hierarchically structured institution, there is a tendency to hear commands and judgments from those higher up in the hierarchy. While we may easily empathize with our peers and with those in less powerful positions, we may find ourselves being defensive or apologetic, instead of empathic, in the presence of those we identify as our superiors. This is why I was particularly pleased that these faculty members had remembered to empathize with their dean as well as with their students. Empathy and the ability to be vulnerable. Because we are called to reveal our deepest feelings and needs, we may sometimes find it challenging to express ourselves in NVC. Self-expression becomes easier, however, after we empathize with others, because we will then have touched their humanness and realize the common qualities we share. The more we connect with the feelings and needs behind their words, the less frightening it is to open up to other people. The situations where we are the most reluctant to express vulnerability are often those where we want to maintain a tough image for fear of losing authority or control. The more we empathize with the other party, the safer we feel. Once I showed my vulnerability to some members of a street gang in Cleveland by acknowledging the hurt I was feeling and my desire to be treated with more respect. "Oh, look," one of them remarked, "he's feeling hurt, isn't that too bad?" At which point all his friends chimed in laughing. Here again, I could interpret them as taking advantage of my vulnerability, option 2, blame others, or I could empathize with the feelings and needs behind their behavior, option 4, sense others' feelings and needs. If, however, I have an image that I'm being humiliated and taken advantage of, I may feel too wounded, angry, or scared to be able to empathize. At such a moment, I would need to withdraw physically in order to offer myself some empathy or to request it from a reliable source. After discovering the needs that had been so powerfully triggered in me and receiving adequate empathy for them, I would then be ready to return and empathize with the other party. In situations of pain, I recommend first getting the empathy necessary to go beyond the thoughts occupying our heads and recognize our deeper needs. As I listened closely to the gang member's remark, "Oh look, he's feeling hurt, isn't that too bad?" and the laughter that followed, I sensed that he and his friends were annoyed and not wanting to be subjected to guilt trips and manipulation. They may have been reacting to people in their past who use phrases like "that hurts me" to imply disapproval. Since I didn't verify it with them out loud, I have no way of knowing if my guess was in fact accurate. Just focusing my attention there, however, kept me from either taking it personally or getting angry. Instead of judging them for ridiculing me or treating me disrespectfully, I concentrated on hearing the pain and the needs behind such behavior. "Hey," one of them burst out, "this is a bunch of crap you're offering us. Suppose there are members of another gang here and they have guns and you don't. And you say just stand there and talk to them. Crap." Then everybody was laughing again, and again I directed my attention to their feelings and needs, so it sounds like you're really fed up with learning something that has no relevance in those situations. Yeah, and if you lived in this neighborhood, you'd know this is a bunch of crap. So you need to trust that someone teaching you something has some knowledge of your neighborhood. Damn right. Some of these dudes would blast you away before you got 2 words out of your mouth. And you need to trust that someone trying to teach you something understands the dangers around here. I continued to listen in this manner, sometimes verbalizing what I heard and sometimes not. This continued for 45 minutes, and then I sensed a shift. They felt that I was truly understanding them. A counselor in the program noticed the shift, and asked them out loud, "What do you think of this man?" The gentleman who had been giving me the roughest time replied, "He's the best speaker we've ever had. We say a lot by listening for other people's feelings and needs." Astonished, the counselor turned to me and whispered, "But you haven't said anything." In fact, I had said a lot by demonstrating that there was nothing they could throw at me that couldn't be translated into universal human feelings and needs. Using empathy to diffuse danger. The ability to offer empathy to people in stressful situations can diffuse potential violence. A teacher in the inner city of St. Louis related an incident where she had conscientiously stayed after school to help a student, even though teachers were warned, for their own safety, to leave the building after classes were dismissed. A stranger entered her classroom, where the following exchange took place. "Young man, take off your clothes." Teacher, noticing that the young man was shaking, "I'm sensing this is very scary for you." "Young man, did you hear me? God damn it, take off your clothes." Teacher, "I'm sensing you're really pissed off right now and you want me to do what you're telling me." "Young man, you're damned right, and you're going to get hurt if you don't." Teacher, "I'd like you to tell me if there's some other way of meeting your needs that wouldn't hurt me." "Young man, I said take them off." Teacher, "I can hear how much you want this. At the same time, I want you to know how scared and horrible I feel, and how grateful I'd be if you'd leave without hurting me." "Young man, give me your purse." The teacher handed the stranger her purse, relieved not to be raped. She later described how, each time she empathized with the young man, she could sense him becoming less adamant in his intention to follow through with the rape. A Metropolitan Police officer attending a follow-up training in NDC once greeted me with this account. "I'm sure glad you had us practicing empathy with angry people that last time. Just a few days after our session, I went to arrest someone in a public housing project. When I brought him out, my car was surrounded by about 60 people screaming things at me like, 'Let him go. He didn't do anything. You police are a bunch of racist pigs.' Although I was skeptical that empathy would help, I didn't have many other options. So I reflected back the feelings that were coming at me. I said things like, 'So you don't trust my reasons for arresting this man? You think it has to do with race?' After several minutes of my continuing to reflect their feelings, the group became less hostile. In the end they opened a path so I could get to my car. Finally, I'd like to illustrate how a young woman used empathy to bypass violence during her night shift at a drug detoxification center in Toronto. The young woman recounted this story during the second NDC workshop she attended. At 11 o'clock one night, a few weeks after her first NDC training, a man who'd obviously been taking drugs walked in off the street and demanded a room. The young woman started to explain to him that all the Rooms had been filled for the night. She was about to hand the man the address of another detox center when he hurled her to the ground. The next thing I knew, he was sitting across my chest holding a knife to my throat and shouting, "You bitch, don't lie to me. You do too have a room." She then proceeded to apply her training by listening for his feelings and needs. "You remember to do that under those conditions?" I asked, impressed. What choice did I have? Desperation sometimes makes good communicators of us all. "You know, Marshall," she added, "that joke you told in the workshop really helped me. In fact, I think it saved my life." "What joke?" "Rather than put your, but, in the face of an angry person, empathize. Remember when you said never to put your, but, in the face of an angry person?" I was all ready to start arguing with him. I was about to say, "But I don't have a room," when I remembered your joke. It had really stayed with me because only the week before, I was arguing with my mother and she'd said to me, "I could kill you when you answer," but, to everything I say. Imagine, if my own mother was angry enough to kill me for using that word, what would this man have done? If I'd said, "But I don't have a room," when he was screaming at me, I have no doubt he would have slit my throat. So instead, I took a deep breath and said, "It sounds like you're really angry and you want to be given a room." He yelled back, "I may be an addict, but by God, I deserve respect. I'm tired of nobody giving me respect. My parents don't give me respect. I'm gonna get respect." I just focused on his feelings and needs and said, "Are you fed up, not getting the respect that you want?" "How long did this go on?" I asked. "Oh, about another 35 minutes, she replied. "That must have been terrifying." "No, not after the first couple of interchanges, because then something else we learned here became apparent. When I concentrated on listening for his feelings and needs, I stopped seeing him as a monster. I could see, just as you'd said, how people who seem like monsters are simply human beings whose language and behavior sometimes keep us from seeing their humanness. The more I was able to focus my attention on his feelings and needs, the more I saw him as a person full of despair whose needs weren't being met. I became confident that if I held my attention there, I wouldn't be hurt. After he'd received the empathy he needed, he got off me, put the knife away, and I helped him find a room at another center. When we listen for feelings and needs, we no longer see people as monsters. Delighted that she'd learned to respond empathically in such an extreme situation, I asked curiously, "What are you doing back here? It sounds like you've mastered NVC and should be out teaching others what you've learned." "Now I need you to help me with a hard one," she said. I'm almost afraid to ask. What could be harder than that? "Now I need you to help me with my mother." Despite all the insight I got into that, but, phenomenon, you know what? It may be difficult to empathize with those who are closest to us. Happened. At supper the next evening when I told my mother what had happened, she said, "You're going to cause your father and me to have a heart attack if you keep that job. You simply have to find different work." So guess what I said to her? "But, mother, it's my life." I couldn't have asked for a more compelling example of how difficult it can be to respond empathically to one's own family members. Empathy in hearing someone's, no. Because our tendency to read rejection into someone else's, no, and, I don't want to, these are important messages for. Empathizing with someone's, no, protects us from taking it personally. Us to be able to empathize with. If we take them personally, we may feel hurt without understanding what's actually going on within the other person. When we shine the light of consciousness on the feelings and needs behind someone else's, no, however, we become cognizant of what they are wanting that prevents them from responding as we would like. One time I asked a woman during a workshop break to join me and other participants for some ice cream nearby. "No," she replied brusquely. The tone of her voice led me to interpret her answer as a rejection, until I reminded myself to tune into the feelings and needs she might be expressing through her. "No. I sense that you are angry," I said. "Is that so?" "No," she replied, "it's just that I don't want to be corrected every time I open my mouth." Now I sensed that she was fearful rather than angry. I checked this out by asking, "So you're feeling fearful and want to protect yourself from being in a situation where you might be judged for how you communicate?" "Yes," she affirmed, "I can imagine sitting in the ice cream shop with you and having you notice everything I say." I then discovered that the way I'd been providing feedback in the workshop had been frightening to her. My empathy for her message had taken the sting out of her. No, for me, I heard her desire to avoid receiving similar feedback in public. Assuring her that I wouldn't evaluate her communication in public, I then conferred with her on ways to give feedback that would leave her feeling safe. And yes, she joined the group for ice cream. Empathy to revive a lifeless conversation. We have all found ourselves in the midst of a lifeless conversation. Perhaps we're at a social event, hearing words without feeling any connection to the speaker. Or we're listening to someone my friend Kelly Bryson would call a Babylonian, someone who elicits in their listeners the fear of interminable conversation. Vitality drains out of conversations when we lose connection with the feelings and needs generating the speaker's words, and with the requests associated with those needs. This effect is common when people talk without consciousness of what they are feeling, needing, or requesting. Instead of being engaged in an exchange of life energy with other human beings, we see ourselves becoming wastebaskets for their words. How and when do we interrupt a dead conversation to bring it back to life? I'd suggest the best time to interrupt is when we've heard one word more than we want to hear. The longer we wait, the harder it is to be civil when we do step in. Our intention in interrupting is not to claim the floor for ourselves, but to help the speaker connect to the life energy behind the words being spoken. We do this by tuning into possible feelings and needs. Thus, if an aunt is repeating the story about how 20 years ago her husband deserted her and her two small children, we might interrupt by saying, "So, Andy, it sounds like you are still feeling hurt, wishing you'd been treated more fairly." People are not aware that empathy is often what they are needing. Neither do they realize that they are more likely to receive that empathy by expressing the feelings and needs that are alive in them than by recounting tales of past injustice and hardship. To bring a conversation back to life, interrupt with empathy. Another way to bring a conversation to life is to openly express our desire to be more connected, and to request information that would help us establish that connection. Once, at a cocktail party, I was in the midst of an abundant flow of words that to me seemed lifeless. "Excuse me," I broke in, addressing the group of 9 other people I'd found myself with. "I'm feeling impatient because I'd like to be more connected with you, but our conversation isn't creating the kind of connection I'm wanting. I'd like to know if the conversation we've been having is meeting your needs, and if so, what needs of yours are being met through it." All 9 people stared at me as if I had thrown a rat in the punch bowl. Fortunately, I remembered to tune into the feelings and needs being expressed through their silence. "Are you annoyed with my interrupting because you would have liked to continue the conversation?" I asked. "What bores the listener bores the speaker too." After another silence, one of the men replied, "No, I'm not annoyed. I was thinking about what you were asking. And no, I wasn't enjoying the conversation. In fact, I was totally bored with it." At the time, I was surprised to hear his response because he had been the one doing most of the talking. Now I am no longer surprised. I have since discovered that conversations that are lifeless for the listener are equally so for the speaker. Speakers prefer that listeners interrupt rather than pretend to listen. You may wonder how we can muster the courage to flatly interrupt someone in the middle of a sentence. I once conducted an informal survey, posing the following question: if you are using more words than somebody wants to hear, do you want that person to pretend to listen or to stop you? Of the scores of people I approached, all but one expressed a preference to be stopped. Their answers gave me courage by convincing me that it is more considerate to interrupt people than to pretend to listen. All of us want our words to enrich others, not to burden them. Empathy for silence. One of the hardest messages for many of us to empathize with is silence. This is especially true when we've expressed ourselves vulnerably and need to know how others are reacting to our words. At such times, it's easy to project our worst fears onto the lack of response and forget to connect with the feelings and needs being expressed through the silence. One time when I was working with the staff of a business organization, I was talking about something deeply emotional and began to cry. When I looked up, I received a response from the organization's director that was not easy. Empathize with silence by listening for the feelings and needs behind it. For me to receive, silence. He turned his face from me with what I interpreted to be an expression of disgust. Fortunately, I remembered to put my attention on what might be going on within him, and said, I am sensing from your response to my crying that you're feeling disgusted, and you'd prefer to have someone more in control of his feelings consulting with your staff. If he had answered yes, I would have been able to accept that we had different values around expressing emotions, without somehow thinking that I was wrong for having expressed my emotions as I did. But instead of, yes, the director replied, no, not at all. I was just thinking of how my wife wishes I could cry. He went on to reveal that his wife, who was divorcing him, had been complaining that living with him was like living with a rock. During my practice as a psychotherapist, I was contacted by the parents of a 20-year-old woman under psychiatric care. She had been undergoing medication, hospitalization, and shock treatments for several months, and had become mute 3 months before her parents contacted me. When they brought her to my office, she had to be assisted because, left to herself, she didn't move. In my office, she crouched in her chair, shaking, her eyes on the floor. Trying to connect empathically with the feelings and needs being expressed through her nonverbal message, I said, I'm sensing that you are frightened and would like to be sure that it's safe to talk. Is that accurate? She showed no reaction, so I expressed my own feeling by saying, I'm very concerned about you, and I'd like you to tell me if there's something I could say or do to make you feel safer. Still no response. For the next 40 minutes, I continued to either reflect her feelings and needs or express my own. There was no visible response, nor even the slightest recognition that I was trying to communicate with her. Finally I expressed that I was tired, and that I wanted her to return the following day. The next few days were like the first. I continued focusing my attention on her feelings and needs, sometimes verbally reflecting what I understood and sometimes doing so silently. From time to time I would express what was going on in myself. She sat shaking in her chair, saying nothing. On the fourth day, when she still didn't respond, I reached over and held her hand. Not knowing whether my words were communicating my concern, I hoped the physical contact might do so more effectively. At first contact, her muscles tensed and she shrank further back into her chair. I was about to release her hand when I sensed a slight yielding, so I kept my hold. After a few moments I noticed a progressive relaxation on her part. I held her hand for several minutes while I talked to her as I had the first few days. Still she said nothing. When she arrived the next day, she appeared even more tense than before, but there was one difference: she extended a clenched fist toward me while turning her face away from me. I was at first confused by the gesture, but then sensed she had something in her hand she wanted me to have. Taking her fist in my hand, I pried open her fingers. In her palm was a crumpled note with the following message: please help me say what's inside. I was elated to receive the sign of her desire to communicate. After another hour of encouragement, she finally expressed the first sentence, slowly and fearfully. When I reflected back what I had heard her saying, she appeared relieved and then continued, slowly and fearfully, to talk. A year later, she sent me a copy of the following entries from her journal. I came out of the hospital, away from shock treatments and strong medicine. That was about April. The 3 months before that are completely blank in my mind, as well as the 3.5 years before April. They say that, after getting out of the hospital, I went through a time at home of not eating, not talking, and wanting to stay in bed all the time. Then I was referred to Dr. Rosenberg for counseling. I don't remember much of those next 2 or 3 months other than being in Dr. Rosenberg's office and talking with him. I'd begun waking up since that first session with him. I'd begun sharing with him things that bothered me, things that I would never have dreamed of telling anyone about. And I remember how much that meant to me. It was so hard to talk. But Dr. Rosenberg cared about me and showed it, and I wanted to talk with him. I was always glad afterwards that I had let something out. I remember counting the days, even the hours, until my next appointment with him. I've also learned that facing reality is not all bad. I am realizing more and more of the things that I need to stand up to, things that I need to get out and do on my own. This is scary, and it's very hard, and it's so discouraging that when I am trying really a lot, I can still fail so terribly. But the good part of reality is that I've been seeing that it includes wonderful things, too. I've learned in the past year about how wonderful it can be to share myself with other people. I think it was mostly just one part that I learned, about the thrill of my talking to other people and having them actually listen, even really understand at times. I continue to be amazed by the healing power of empathy. Time and again I have witnessed people transcend the paralyzing effects of psychological pain when they have sufficient contact with empathy lies in our ability to be present. Someone who can hear them empathically. As listeners, we don't need insights into psychological dynamics or training in psychotherapy. What is essential is our ability to be present to what's really going on within, to the unique feelings and needs a person is experiencing in that very moment. Summary. Our ability to offer empathy can allow us to stay vulnerable, diffuse potential violence, hear the word no without taking it as a rejection, revive a lifeless conversation, and even hear the feelings and needs expressed through silence. Time and again, people transcend the paralyzing effects of psychological pain when they have sufficient contact with someone who can hear them empathically. Chapter 9. W. Connecting compassionately with ourselves. Let us become the change we seek in the world. Mahatma Gandhi. NVC's most important use may be in developing self-compassion. We have seen how NVC contributes to relationships with friends and family, at work and in the political arena. Its most crucial application, however, may be in the way we treat ourselves. When we are internally violent toward ourselves, it is difficult to be genuinely compassionate toward others. Remembering the specialness of what we are. In the play A Thousand Clowns by Herb Gardner, the protagonist refuses to release his 12-year-old nephew to child welfare authorities, declaring, I want him to get to know exactly the special thing he is or else he won't notice it when it starts to go. I want him to stay awake. I want to be sure he sees all the wild possibilities. I want him to know it's worth all the trouble just to give the world a little goosing when you get the chance. And I want him to know the subtle, sneaky, important reason why he was born a human being and not a chair. I am gravely concerned that many of us have lost awareness of the special thing we are. We have forgotten the subtle, sneaky, important reason the uncle so passionately wanted his nephew to know. When critical self-concepts prevent us from seeing the beauty in ourselves, we lose connection with the divine energy that is our source. Conditioned to view ourselves as objects full of shortcomings, is it any wonder that many of us end up relating violently to ourselves? We use NVC to evaluate ourselves in ways that engender growth rather than self-hatred. An important area where this violence can be replaced with compassion is in our moment-to-moment evaluation of ourselves. Since we want whatever we do to lead to the enrichment of life, it is critical to know how to evaluate events and conditions in ways that help us learn and make ongoing choices that serve us. Unfortunately, the way we've been trained to evaluate ourselves often promotes more self-hatred than learning. Evaluating ourselves when we've been less than perfect. In a routine workshop activity, I ask participants to recall a recent occasion when they did something they wish they hadn't. We then look at how they spoke to themselves immediately after having made what is referred in common language as a mistake or error. Typical statements were, "That was dumb. How could you do such a stupid thing? What's wrong with you? You're always messing up. That's selfish." These speakers had been taught to judge themselves in ways that imply that what they did was wrong or bad. Their self-admonishment implicitly assumes that they deserve to suffer for what they've done. It is tragic that so many of us get enmeshed in self-hatred rather than benefit from our mistakes, which shows our limitations and guide us towards growth. Even when we sometimes do learn a lesson from mistakes for which we judge ourselves harshly, I worry about the nature of the energy behind that kind of change and learning. I'd like change to be stimulated by a clear desire to enrich life for ourselves or for others rather than by destructive energies such as shame or guilt. If the way we evaluate ourselves leads us to feel shame, and we consequently change our behavior, we are allowing our growing and learning to be guided by self-hatred. Shame is a form of self-hatred, and actions taken in reaction to shame are not free and joyful acts. Even if our intention is to behave with more kindness and sensitivity, if people sense shame or guilt behind our actions, they are less likely to appreciate what we do than if we are motivated purely by the human desire to contribute to life. Avoid shooting yourself. In our language there is a word with enormous power to create shame and guilt. This violent word, which we commonly use to evaluate ourselves, is so deeply ingrained in our consciousness that many of us would have trouble imagining how to live without it. It is the word should, as in, I should have known better, or, I shouldn't have done that. Most of the time when we use this word with ourselves, we resist learning, because should implies that there is no choice. Human beings, when hearing any kind of demand, tend to resist because it threatens our autonomy, our strong need for choice. We have this reaction to tyranny even when it's internal tyranny in the form of a should. A similar expression of internal demand occurs in the following self-evaluation: what I'm doing is just terrible. I really must do something about it. Think for a moment of all the people you've heard say, I really should give up smoking, or, I really have to do something about exercising more. They keep saying what they must do and they keep resisting doing it, because human beings were not meant to be slaves. We were not meant to succumb to the dictates of should and have to, whether they come from outside or inside of ourselves. And if we do yield and submit to these demands, our actions arise from an energy that is devoid of life-giving joy. Translating self-judgments and inner demands. When we communicate with ourselves on a regular basis through inner judgment, blame, and demand, it's not surprising that our self-concept gives into feeling more like a chair than a human being. A basic premise of NVC is that whenever we imply that someone is wrong or bad, what we are really saying is that he or she is not acting in harmony with our needs. If the person we are judging happens to be ourselves, what we are saying is, I myself am not behaving in harmony with my own needs. I am convinced that if we learn to evaluate ourselves in terms of whether and how well our needs are being fulfilled, we are much more likely to learn from the evaluation. Our challenge then, when we are doing something that is not enriching life, is to evaluate ourselves moment by moment in a way that inspires change both 1. In the direction of where we would like to go, and 2. Out of respect and compassion for ourselves, rather than out of self-hatred, guilt or shame. Self-judgments, like all judgments, are tragic expressions of unmet needs. NVC morning. After a lifetime of schooling and socialization, it is probably too late for most of us to train our minds to think purely in terms of what we need and value from moment to moment. However, just as we have learned to translate judgments when conversing with others, we can train ourselves to recognize judgmental self-talk and to immediately focus our attention on the underlying needs. For example, if we find ourselves reacting reproachfully to something we did, look, you just mess up again, we can quickly stop and ask ourselves, what unmet need of mine is being expressed through this moralistic judgment? When we do connect to the need, and there may be several layers of needs, we will notice a remarkable shift in our bodies. Instead of the shame, guilt, or depression we likely feel when criticizing ourselves for having messed up again, we will experience any number of other feelings. Whether it's sadness, frustration, disappointment, fear, grief, or some other feeling, we have been endowed by nature with these feelings for a purpose. They mobilize us to pursue and fulfill what we need or value. The impact of these feelings on our spirit and bodies is substantially different from the disconnection that is brought on by guilt, shame, and depression. NVC morning, connecting with the feelings and unmet needs stimulated by past actions we now regret. Mourning in NVC is the process of fully connecting with the unmet needs and the feelings that are generated when we have been less than perfect. It is an experience of regret, but regret that helps us learn from what we have done without blaming or hating ourselves. We see how our behavior ran counter to our own needs and values, and we open ourselves to feelings that arise out of that awareness. When our consciousness is focused on what we need, we are naturally stimulated toward creative possibilities for how to get that need met. In contrast, the moralistic judgments we use when blaming ourselves tend to obscure such possibilities and to perpetuate a state of self-punishment. Self-forgiveness. We follow up on the process of mourning with self-forgiveness. Turning our attention to the part of the self which chose to act in the way that led to the present situation, we ask ourselves, when I behaved in the way which I now regret, what need of mine was I trying to meet? I believe that human beings are always acting in the service of needs and values. This is true whether the action does or does not meet the need, or whether it's one we end up celebrating or regretting. When we listen empathically to ourselves, we will be able to hear the underlying need. Self-forgiveness occurs the moment this empathic connection is made. Then we are able to recognize how our choice was an attempt to serve life, even as the mourning process teaches us how it fell short of fulfilling our needs. NVC self-forgiveness, connecting with the need we were trying to meet when we took the action that we now regret. An important aspect of self-compassion is to be able to empathically hold both parts of ourselves, the self that regrets a past action and the self that took the action in the first place. The process of mourning and self-forgiveness frees us in the direction of learning and growing. In connecting moment by moment to our needs, we increase our creative capacity to act in harmony with them. The lesson of the polka-dotted suit. I would like to illustrate the process of mourning and self-forgiveness by recalling a personal event. The day before an important workshop, I had bought a light gray summer suit to wear. At the end of the well-attended workshop, I was swarmed by participants asking for my signature, address, and other information. With time closing in on another appointment, I hastened to attend to the requests of the participants, signing and scribbling on the many bits of paper thrust in front of me. As I rushed out the door, I stuck my pen, uncapped, in the pocket of my new suit. Once outside, I discovered to my horror that instead of the nice light gray suit, I now had a polka dotted suit. For 20 minutes I was brutal with myself. How could you be so careless? What a stupid thing to do. I had just ruined a brand new suit. If ever I needed compassion and understanding, this was the time, yet there I was responding to myself in a way that left me feeling worse than ever. Fortunately, after only 20 minutes, I noticed what I was doing. I stopped, looked for the need of mine that was unmet by having left the pen uncapped, and asked myself, what need lies behind my judging myself as careless and stupid. Immediately I saw that it was to take better care of myself, to have given more attention to my own needs while I was rushing to address everyone else's needs. As soon as I touched that part of myself and connected to the deep longing to be more aware and caring of my own needs, my feelings shifted. There was a release of tension in my body as the anger, shame, and guilt I was harboring toward myself dissipated. I fully mourned the ruined suit and uncapped pen as I opened to feelings of sadness arising along with the yearning to take better care of myself. We are compassionate with ourselves when we are able to embrace all parts of ourselves and recognize the needs and values expressed by each part. Next I shifted my attention to the need I was meeting when I slipped the uncapped pen into my pocket. I recognized how much I valued care and consideration for other people's needs. Of course, in taking such good care of other people's needs, I had not taken the time to do the same for myself. But instead of blame, I felt a wave of compassion for myself as I realized that even my rushing and putting the pen away unthinkingly had come out of serving my own need to respond to others in a caring way. In the compassionate place, I am able to hold both needs, in one hand, to respond in a caring way to others' needs, and in the other, to be aware of and take better care of my own needs. On becoming conscious of both needs, I can imagine ways of behaving differently in similar situations and arriving at solutions more resourcefully than if I lose that consciousness in a sea of self-judgment. Don't do anything that isn't play. In addition to the process of mourning and self-forgiveness, another aspect of self-compassion I emphasize is in the energy that's behind whatever action we take. When I advise, don't do anything that isn't play, some take me to be radical, even insane. I earnestly believe, however, that an important form of self-compassion is to make choices motivated purely by our desire to contribute to life rather than out of fear, guilt, shame, duty, or obligation. When we are conscious of the life-enriching purpose behind an action we take, when the sole energy that motivates us is simply to make life wonderful for others and ourselves, then even hard work has an element of play in it. An otherwise joyful activity performed out of obligation, duty, fear, guilt, or shame will lose its joy and eventually engender resistance. We want to take action out of the desire to contribute to life rather than out of fear, guilt, shame, or obligation. In Chapter 2, we considered replacing language that implies lack of choice with language that acknowledges choice. Many years ago I began to engage in an activity which significantly enlarged the pool of joy and happiness available to my life, while diminishing depression, guilt, and shame. I offer it here as a possible way to deepen our compassion for ourselves, to help us live our lives out of joyous play by staying grounded in a clear awareness of the life-enriching need behind everything we do. Translating have to choose to. Step 1. What do you do in your life that you don't experience as playful? List on a piece of paper all those things that you tell yourself you have to do. List any activity you dread but do anyway because you perceive yourself to have no choice. When I first reviewed my own list, just seeing how long it was gave me insight as to why so much of my time was spent not enjoying life. I noticed how many ordinary, daily things I was doing by tricking myself into believing that I had to do them. The first item on my list was, write clinical reports. I hated writing these reports, yet I was spending at least an hour of agony over them every day. My second item was, drive the children's carpool to school. Step 2. After completing your list, clearly acknowledge to yourself that you are doing these things because you choose to do them, not because you have to. Insert the words, I choose to, in front of each item you listed. I recall my own resistance to this step. Writing clinical reports, I insisted to myself, is not something I choose to do. I have to do it. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have to write these reports. Step 3. After having acknowledged that you choose to do a particular activity, get in touch with the intention behind your choice by completing the statement, I choose to. Because I want. At first I fumbled to identify what I wanted from writing clinical reports. I had already determined, several months earlier, that the reports did not serve my clients enough to justify the time they were taking, so why was I continuing to invest so much energy into preparation? Finally I realized that I was choosing to write the reports solely because I wanted the income they provided. As soon as I recognized this, I never wrote another clinical report. I can't tell you how joyful I feel just thinking of how many clinical reports I haven't written since that moment 35 years ago. When I realized that money was my primary motivation, I immediately saw that I could find other ways to take care of myself financially, and that in fact, I'd rather scavenge in garbage cans for food than write another clinical report. With every choice you make, be conscious of what need it serves. The next item on my list of unjoyful tasks was driving the children to school. When I examined the reason behind that chore, however, I felt appreciation for the benefits my children received from attending their school. When I examined the reason behind that chore, however, I felt appreciation for the benefits my children received from attending their school. They could easily walk to the neighborhood school, but their own school was far more in harmony with my educational values. I continued to drive, but with a different energy. Instead of, oh, darn, I have to drive the carpool today, I was conscious of my purpose, which was for my children to have a quality of education that was very dear to me. Of course I sometimes needed to remind myself 2 or 3 times during the drive to refocus my mind on what purpose my action was serving. Cultivating awareness of the energy behind our actions. As you explore the statement, I choose to. Because I want, you may discover, as I did with the children's carpool, the important values behind the choices you've made. I am convinced that after we gain clarity regarding the need being served by our actions, we can experience those actions as play even when they involve hard work, challenge, or frustration. For some items on your list, however, you might uncover one or several of the following motivations. 1. For money. Money is a major form of extrinsic reward in our society. Choices prompted by a desire for reward are costly. They deprive us of the joy in life that comes with actions grounded in the clear intention to contribute to a human need. Money is not a need, as we define it in NDC. It is one of countless strategies that may be selected to address a need. 2. For approval. Like money, approval from others is a form of extrinsic reward. Our culture has educated us to hunger for reward. We attended schools that used extrinsic means to motivate us to study. We grew up in homes where we were rewarded for being good little boys and girls, and were punished when our caretakers judged us to be otherwise. Thus, as adults, we easily trick ourselves into believing that life consists of doing things for reward. We are addicted to getting a smile, a pat on the back, and people's verbal judgments that we are a good person, good parent, good citizen, good worker, good friend, and so forth. We do things to get people to like us and avoid things that may lead people to dislike or punish us. I find it tragic that we work so hard to buy love and assume that we must deny ourselves and do for others in order to be liked. In fact, when we do things solely in the spirit of enhancing life, we will find others appreciating us. Their appreciation, however, is only a feedback mechanism confirming that our efforts had the intended effect. The recognition that we have chosen to use our power to serve life and have done so successfully brings us a genuine joy of celebrating ourselves in a way that approval from others can never offer. 3. To escape punishment. Some of us pay income tax primarily to avoid punishment. As a consequence, we are likely to approach that yearly ritual with a degree of resentment. I recall, however, from my childhood how differently my father and grandfather felt about paying taxes. They headed to the United States from Russia and were desirous of supporting a government they believed was protecting people in a way that the Tsar had not. Imagining the many people whose welfare was being served by their tax money, they felt earnest pleasure as they sent their checks to the U.S. government. 4. To avoid shame. There may be some tasks we choose to do just to avoid shame. We know that if we don't do them, we'll end up suffering severe self-judgment, hearing our own voice telling us there is something wrong or stupid about us. If we do something stimulated solely by the urge to avoid shame, we will generally end up detesting it. 5. To avoid guilt. In other instances, we may think, if I don't do this, people will be disappointed in me. We are afraid we'll end up feeling guilty for failing to fulfill other people's expectations of us. There is a world of difference between doing something for others in order to avoid guilt and doing it out of a clear awareness of our own need to contribute to the happiness of other human beings. The first is a world filled with misery, the second is a world filled with play. Be conscious of actions motivated by the desire for money or approval, and by fear, shame, or guilt. Know the price you pay for them. 6. To satisfy a sense of duty. When we use language which denies choice, for example, words such as should, have to, ought, must, can't, supposed to, etc., our behaviors arise out of a vague sense of guilt, duty, or obligation. I consider this to be the most socially dangerous and personally unfortunate of all the ways we act when we're cut off from our needs. In Chapter 2 we saw how the concept of MVSS rash allowed Adolf Eichmann and his colleagues to send tens of thousands of people to their deaths without feeling emotionally affected or personally responsible. When we speak a language that denies choice, we forfeit the life in ourselves for a robot-like mentality that disconnects us from our own core. The most dangerous of all behaviors may consist of doing things, because we're supposed to. After examining the list of items you have generated, you may decide to stop doing certain things in the same spirit that I chose to forego writing clinical reports. As radical as it may seem, it is possible to do things only out of play. I believe that to the degree that we engage moment by moment in the playfulness of enriching life, motivated solely by the desire for enriching life, to that degree are we being compassionate with ourselves. Summary. The most crucial application of NVC may be in the way we treat ourselves. When we make mistakes, instead of getting caught up in moralistic self-judgments, we can use the process of NVC mourning and self-forgiveness to show us where we can grow. By assessing our behaviors in terms of our own unmet needs, the impetus for change comes not out of shame, guilt, anger, or depression, but out of the genuine desire to contribute to our own and others' well-being. We also cultivate self-compassion by consciously choosing in daily life to act only in service to our own needs and values rather than out of duty, for extrinsic rewards, or to avoid guilt, shame, and punishment. If we review the joyless acts to which we currently subject ourselves and make the translation from have to choose to, we will discover more play and integrity in our lives. T. Chapter 10. Expressing anger fully. The subject of anger gives us a unique opportunity to dive more deeply into NVC. Because it brings many aspects of this process into sharp focus, the expression of anger clearly demonstrates the difference between NVC and other forms of communication. Killing people is too superficial. I would like to suggest that killing people is too superficial. Killing, hitting, blaming, hurting others, whether physically or emotionally, are all superficial expressions of what is going on within us when we are angry. If we are truly angry, we would want a much more powerful way to fully express ourselves. This understanding comes as a relief to many groups I work with that experience oppression and discrimination and want to increase their power to effect change. Such groups are uneasy when they hear the terms nonviolent or compassionate communication because they have so often been urged to stifle their anger, calm down, and accept the status quo. They worry about approaches that view their anger as an undesirable quality needing to be purged. The process we are describing, however, does not encourage us to ignore, squash, or swallow anger, but rather to express the core of our anger fully and wholeheartedly. Distinguishing stimulus from cause. The first step to fully expressing anger in NVC is to divorce the other person from any responsibility for our anger. We rid ourselves of thoughts such as, he or she or they made me angry when they did that. Such thinking leads us to express our anger superficially by blaming or punishing the other person. Earlier we saw that the behavior of others may be a stimulus for our feelings, but not the cause. We are never angry because of what someone else did. We can identify the other person's behavior as the stimulus, but it is important to establish a clear separation between stimulus and cause. We are never angry because of what others say or do. I'd like to illustrate this distinction with an example from my work in a Swedish prison. My job was to show prisoners who had behaved in violent ways how to fully express their anger rather than to kill, beat, or rape other people. During an exercise calling on participants to identify the stimulus of their anger, one prisoner wrote, 3 weeks ago I made a request to the prison officials and they still haven't responded to it. His statement was a clear observation of a stimulus, describing what other people had done. I then asked him to state the cause of his anger. When this happened, you felt angry because what? I just told you, he exclaimed. I felt angry because they didn't respond to my request. By equating stimulus and cause, he had tricked himself into thinking that it was the behavior of the prison officials that was making him angry. This is an easy habit to acquire in a culture that uses guilt as a means of controlling people. In such cultures, it becomes important to trick people into thinking that we can make others feel a certain way. Where guilt is a tactic of manipulation and coercion, it is useful to confuse stimulus and cause. As mentioned earlier, children who hear, it hurts mommy and daddy when you get poor grades, are led to believe that their behavior is the cause of their parents' pain. The same dynamic is observed among intimate partners. It really disappoints me when you're not here for my birthday. The English language facilitates the use of this guilt-inducing tactic. To motivate by guilt, mix up stimulus and cause. We say, you make me angry. You hurt me by doing that. I feel sad because you did that. We use our language in many different ways to trick ourselves into believing that our feelings result from what others do. The first step in the process of fully expressing our anger is to realize that what other people do is never the cause of how we feel. The cause of anger lies in our thinking, in thoughts of blame and judgment. So what is the cause of anger? In Chapter 5, we discuss the 4 options we have when confronted with a message or behavior that we don't like. Anger is generated when we choose the second option. Whenever we are angry, we are finding fault, we are choosing to play God by judging or blaming the other person for being wrong or deserving punishment. I would like to suggest that this is the cause of anger. Even if we are not initially conscious of it, the cause of anger is located in our own thinking. The third option described in Chapter 5 is to shine the light of consciousness on our own feelings and needs. Rather than going up to our head to make a mental analysis of wrongness regarding somebody, we choose to connect to the life that is within us. This life energy is most palpable and accessible when we focus on what we need in each moment. For example, if someone arrives late for an appointment and we need reassurance that she cares about us, we may feel hurt. If, instead, our need is to spend time purposefully and constructively, we may feel frustrated. But if our need is for 30 minutes of quiet solitude, we may be grateful for her tardiness and feel pleased. Thus, it is not the behavior of the other person but our own need that causes our feeling. When we connect to our need, whether it is for reassurance, purposefulness, or solitude, we are in touch with our life energy. We may have strong feelings, but we are never angry. Anger is a result of life alienating thinking that is disconnected from needs. It indicates that we have moved up to our head to analyze and judge somebody rather than focus on which of our needs are not getting met. In addition to the third option of focusing on our own needs and feelings, the choice is ours at any moment to shine the light of consciousness on the other person's feelings and needs. When we choose this fourth option, we also never feel anger. We are not repressing the anger, we see how anger is simply absent in each moment that we are fully present with the other person's feelings and needs. All anger has a life-serving core. But, I am asked, aren't there circumstances in which anger is justified? Isn't righteous indignation called for in the face of careless, thoughtless pollution of the environment, for example? My answer is that I strongly believe that to whatever degree I support the consciousness that there is such a thing as a careless action, or a conscientious action, a greedy person, or a moral person, I am contributing to violence on this planet. Rather than agreeing or disagreeing about what people are for murdering, raping, or polluting the environment, I believe we serve life better by focusing attention on what we are needing. When we judge others, we contribute to violence. I see all anger as a result of life alienating, violence-provoking thinking. At the core of all anger is a need. At the core of all anger is a need that is not being fulfilled. Thus anger can be valuable if we use it as an alarm clock to wake us up, to realize we have a need that isn't being met and that we are thinking in a way that makes it unlikely to be met. To fully express anger requires full consciousness of our need. In addition, energy is required to get the need met. Anger, however, co-opts our energy by directing it toward punishing people rather than meeting our needs. Instead of engaging in righteous indignation, I recommend connecting empathically with our own needs or those of others. This may take extensive practice, whereby over and over again, we consciously replace the phrase, I am angry because they, with, I am angry because I am needing. Quote. I once was taught a remarkable lesson while working with students in a correctional school for children in Wisconsin. On to. Anger co-opts our energy by diverting it toward punitive actions. Successive days I was hit on the nose in remarkably similar ways. The first time, I received a sharp blow across the nose from an elbow while interceding in a fight between two students. I was so enraged it was all I could do to keep myself from hitting back. On the streets of Detroit where I grew up, it took far less than an elbow in the nose to provoke me to rage. The second day, similar situation, same nose, and thus more physical pain, but not a bit of anger. Use anger as a wake-up call. Reflecting deeply that evening on this experience, I recognized how I had labeled the first child in my mind as a spoiled brat. That image was in my head before his elbow ever caught my nose, and when it did, it was no longer simply an elbow hitting my nose. It was, that obnoxious brat has no right to do this. I had another judgment about the second child. I saw him as a pathetic creature. Since I had a tendency to worry about this child, even though my nose was hurting and bleeding much more severely, the second day I felt no rage at all. I could not have received a more powerful lesson to help me see that it's not what the other person is, but the images and interpretations in my own head that produce my anger. Stimulus versus cause. Practical implications. I emphasize the distinction between cause and stimulus on practical and tactical as well as on philosophical grounds. I'd like to illustrate this point by returning to my dialogue with John, the Swedish prisoner. John, 3 weeks ago I made a request to the prison officials and they still haven't responded to my request. MBR, so when this happened, you felt angry because what? John, I just told you. They didn't respond to my request. MBR, hold it. Instead of saying, I felt angry because they, stop and become conscious of what you're telling yourself that's making you so angry. John, I'm not telling myself anything. MBR, stop, slow down, just listen to what's going on inside. John, after silently reflecting, I'm telling myself that they have no respect for human beings. They are a bunch of cold, faceless bureaucrats who don't give a damn about anybody but themselves. They're a real bunch of. MBR, thanks, that's enough. Now you know why you're angry, it's that kind of thinking. John, but what's wrong with thinking that way? MBR, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with thinking that way. Notice if I say there's something wrong with you for thinking that way, I'd be thinking the same way about you. I don't say it's wrong to judge people, to call them faceless bureaucrats or to label their actions inconsiderate or selfish. However, it's that kind of thinking on your part that makes you feel very angry. Focus your attention on your needs. What are your needs in this situation? John, after a long silence, Marshall, I need the training I was requesting. If I don't get that training, as sure as I'm sitting here, I'm gonna end up back in this prison when I get out. MBR, now that your attention is on your needs, how do you feel? John, scared. When we become aware of our needs, anger gives way to life-serving feelings. MBR, now put yourself in the shoes of a prison official. If I'm an inmate, am I more likely to get my needs met if I come to you saying, hey, I really need that training and I'm scared of what's going to happen if I don't get it, or if I approach while seeing you as a faceless bureaucrat? Even if I don't say those words out loud, my eyes will reveal that kind of thinking. Which way am I more likely to get my needs met? John stares at the floor and remains silent. MBR, hey, buddy, what's going on? John, can't talk about it. Violence comes from the belief that other people cause our pain and therefore deserve punishment. 3 hours later, John approached me and said, Marshall, I wish you had taught me 2 years ago what you taught me this morning. I wouldn't have had to kill my best friend. All violence is the result of people tricking themselves, as did this young Man, into believing that their pain derives from other people and that consequently those people deserve to be punished. We recall 4 options when hearing a difficult message. 1. Blame ourselves. 2. Blame others. 3. Sense our own feelings and needs. 4. Sense others' feelings and needs. One time I saw my younger son take a 50-cent piece from his sister's room. I said, "Brett, did you ask your sister whether you could have that?" "I didn't take it from her," he answered. Now I faced my 4 options. I could have called him a liar, which would, however, have worked against my getting my needs met, since any judgment of another person diminishes the likelihood of our needs being met. Where I focused my attention at that moment was critical. If I were to judge him a liar, it would point me in one direction. If I were to think that he didn't respect me enough to tell me the truth, I would be pointed in another direction. If, however, I were either to empathize with him at that moment, or express nakedly what I was feeling and needing, I would greatly increase the possibility of getting my needs met. The way I expressed my choice, which in this situation turned out to be helpful, was not so much through what I said, but through what I did. Instead of judging him as lying, I tried to hear his feeling. He was scared, and his need was to protect himself from being punished. By empathizing with him, I had a chance of making an emotional connection out of which we could both get our needs met. However, if I had approached him with the view that he was lying, even if I hadn't expressed it out loud, he would have been less likely to feel safe expressing truthfully what had happened. I would have then become part of the process. By the very act of judging another person as a liar, I would contribute to a self-fulfilling prophecy. Why would people want to tell the truth, knowing they will be judged and punished for doing so? Judgments of others contribute to self-fulfilling prophecies. I would like to suggest that when our heads are filled with judgments and analyses that others are bad, greedy, irresponsible, lying, cheating, polluting the environment, valuing profit more than life, or behaving in other ways they shouldn't, very few of them will be interested in our needs. If we want to protect the environment, and we go to a corporate executive with the attitude, "You know, you are really a killer of the planet, you have no right to abuse the land in this way," we have severely impaired our chances of getting our needs met. It is a rare human being who can maintain focus on our needs when we are expressing them through images of their wrongness. Of course, we may be successful in using such judgments to intimidate people into meeting our needs. If they feel so frightened, guilty, or ashamed that they change their behavior, we may come to believe that it is possible to win by telling people what's wrong with them. With a broader perspective, however, we realize that each time our needs are met in this way, we not only lose, but we have contributed very tangibly to violence on the planet. We may have solved an immediate problem, but we will have created another one. The more people hear blame and judgment, the more defensive and aggressive they become, and the less they will care about our needs in the future. So even if our present need is met in the sense that people do what we want, we will pay for it later. 4 steps to expressing anger. Let's look at what the process of fully expressing our anger actually requires in concrete form. The first step is to stop and do nothing except to breathe. We refrain from making any move to blame or punish the other person. We simply stay quiet. Then we identify the thoughts that are making us angry. For example, we overhear a statement that leads us to believe that we've been excluded from a conversation because of race. We sense anger, stop, and recognize the thoughts stirring in our head. It's unfair to act like that. She's being racist. We know that all judgments like these are tragic expressions of unmet needs, so we take the next step and connect to the needs behind those thoughts. If we judge someone to be racist, the need may be for inclusion, equality, respect, or connection. Steps to expressing anger. 1. Stop, breathe. 2. Identify our judgmental thoughts. 3. Connect with our needs. 4. Express our feelings and unmet needs. To fully express ourselves, we now open our mouth and speak the anger, but the anger has been transformed into needs and need-connected feelings. To articulate these feelings may require a lot of courage. For me, it's easy to get angry and tell people, "That was a racist thing to do." In fact, I may even enjoy saying such things, but to get down to the deeper feelings and needs behind such a statement may be very frightening. To fully express our anger, we may say to the other person, "When you entered the room and started talking to the others and didn't say anything to me, and then made the comment about white people, I felt really sick to my stomach, and got so scared, it triggered off all kinds of needs on my part to be treated equally. I'd like you to tell me how you feel when I tell you this." Offering empathy first. In most cases, however, another step needs to take place before we can expect the other party to connect with what is going on in us. Because it will often be difficult for others to receive our feelings and needs in such situations, if we want them to hear us, we would need first to empathize with them. The more we empathize with what leads them to behave in the ways that are not meeting our needs, the more likely it is that they will be able to reciprocate afterwards. Over the last 30 years I've had a wealth of experience speaking NBC with people who harbor strong beliefs about specific races and ethnic groups. Early one morning I was picked up by a cab at an airport to take me into town. The more we hear them, the more they'll hear us. A message from the dispatcher came over the loudspeaker for the cabbie: "Pick up Mr. Fishman at the synagogue on Main Street." The man next to me in the cab muttered, "These kikes get up early in the morning so they can screw everybody out of their money." For 20 seconds, there was smoke coming out of my ears. In earlier years, my first reaction would have been to want to physically hurt such a person. Instead I took a few deep breaths and then gave myself some empathy for the hurt, fear, and rage that were stirring inside me. I attended to my feelings. I stayed conscious that my anger wasn't coming from my fellow passenger nor the statement he had just made. His comment had triggered off a volcano inside of me, but I knew that my anger and profound fear came from a far deeper source than those words he had just uttered. I sat back and simply allowed the violent thoughts to play themselves out. I even enjoyed the image of actually grabbing his head and smashing it. Giving myself this empathy enabled me to then focus my attention on the humanness behind his message, after which the first words out of my mouth were, "Are you feeling?" Quote. I tried to empathize with him, to hear his pain. Why? Because I wanted to see the beauty in him, and I wanted for him to fully apprehend what I had experienced when he made his remark. I knew I wouldn't receive that kind of understanding if there were a storm brewing inside of him. My intention was to connect with him and show respectful empathy for the life energy in him that was behind the comment. Stay conscious of the violent thoughts that arise in our minds, without judging them. My experience told me that if I were able to empathize, then he would be able to hear me in return. It would not be easy, but he would be able to. "Are you feeling frustrated?" I asked. "It appears that you might have had some bad experiences with Jewish people." He eyed me for a moment. "Yeah, these people are disgusting. They'll do anything for money." You feel distrust and the need to protect yourself when you're involved in financial affairs with them. When we hear another person's feelings and needs, we recognize our common humanity. "That's right," he exclaimed, continuing to release more judgments, as I listened for the feeling and need behind each one. When we settle our attention on other people's feelings and needs, we experience our common humanity. When I hear that he's scared and wants to protect himself, I recognize how I also have a need to protect myself, and I too know what it's like to be scared. When my consciousness is focused on another human being's feelings and needs, I see the universality of our experience. I had a major conflict with what went on in his head, but I've learned that I enjoy human beings more if I don't hear what they think. Especially with folks who have his kind of thoughts. I've learned to savor life much more by only hearing what's going on in their hearts and not getting caught up with the stuff in their heads. The man kept on pouring out his sadness and frustration. Before I knew it, he finished with Jews and moved on to blacks. He was charged with pain around a number of subjects. After nearly 10 minutes of my just listening, he stopped. He had felt understood. Then I let him know what was going on in me. MBR, you know, when you first started to talk, I felt a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, sadness, and discouragement, because I've had very different experiences with Jews than you've had, and I was wanting you to have much more the kind of experiences I've had. Can you tell me what you heard me say? Man, oh, I'm not saying they're all. MBR, excuse me, hold on, hold it. Can you tell me what you heard me say? Our need is for the other person to truly hear our pain. Man, what are you talking about? MBR, let me repeat what I'm trying to say. I really want you to just hear the pain I felt when I heard your words. It's really important to me that you hear that. I was saying I felt a real sense of sadness because my experiences with Jewish people have been very different. I was just wishing that you had had some experiences that were different from the ones you were describing. Can you tell me what you heard me say? Man, you're saying I have no right to talk the way I did. MBR, no, I would like you to hear me differently. I really don't want to blame you. I have no desire to blame you. I needed to slow down the conversation, because in my experience, to whatever degree people hear blame, they have failed to hear our pain. If this man said, those were terrible things for me to say, those were racist remarks made, he would not have heard my pain. People do not hear our pain when they believe they are at fault. As soon as people think that they have done something wrong, they will not be fully apprehending our pain. I didn't want him to hear blame, because I wanted him to know what had gone on in my heart when he uttered his remark. Blaming is easy. People are used to hearing blame. Sometimes they agree with it and hate themselves, which doesn't stop them from behaving the same way, and sometimes they hate us for calling them racist or whatever, which also doesn't stop their behavior. If we sense blame entering their mind, as I did in the cab, we may need to slow down, go back, and hear their pain for a while more. Taking our time. Probably the most important part of learning how to live the process we have been discussing is to take our time. We may feel awkward deviating from the habitual behaviors that our conditioning has rendered automatic, but if our intention is to consciously live life in harmony with our values, then we'll want to take our time. A friend of mine, Sam Williams, jotted down the basic components of the NDC process on a 3x5 card, which he would use as a cheat sheet at work. When his boss would confront him, Sam would stop, refer to the card in his hand, and take time to remember how to respond. When I asked whether his colleagues were finding him a little strange, constantly staring into his hand and taking so much time to form his sentences, Sam replied, "It doesn't actually take that much more time, but even if it did, it's still worth it to me. It's important for me to know that I am responding to people the way I really want to." At home he was more overt, explaining to his wife and children why he was taking the time and trouble to consult the card. Whenever there was an argument in the family, he would pull out the card and take his time. After about a month, he felt comfortable enough to put it away. Then one evening, he and Scotty, age 4, were having a conflict over television and it wasn't going well. "Daddy," Scotty said urgently, "get the card." Practice translating each judgment into an unmet need. For those of you wishing to apply NVC, especially in challenging situations of anger, I would suggest the following exercise. As we have seen, our anger comes from judgments, labels, and thoughts of blame, of what people should do and what they deserve. List the judgments that float most frequently in your head by using the cue, "I don't like people who are." Collect all such negative judgments in your head and then ask yourself, when I make that judgment of a person, what am I needing and not getting? In this way, you train yourself to frame your thinking in terms of unmet needs rather than in terms of judgments of other people. Take your time. Practice is essential, because most of us were raised, if not on the streets of Detroit, then somewhere only slightly less violent. Judging and blaming have become second nature to us. To practice NVC, we need to proceed slowly, think carefully before we speak, and often just take a deep breath and not speak at all. Learning the process and applying it both take time. Summary. Blaming and punishing others are superficial expressions of anger. If we wish to fully express anger, the first step is to divorce the other person from any responsibility for our anger. Instead we shine the light of consciousness on our own feelings and needs. By expressing our needs, we are far more likely to get them met than by judging, blaming, or punishing others. The 4 steps to expressing anger are 1. Stop and breathe, 2. Identify our judgmental thoughts, 3. Connect with our needs, and 4. Express our feelings and unmet needs. Sometimes, in between steps 3 and 4, we may choose to empathize with the other person so that he or she will be better able to hear us when we express ourselves in step 4. We need to take our time both in learning and in applying the process of NVC. NVC in action. Parent and teen dialogue. A life-threatening issue in this situation. 15-year-old Bill took a car, without permission, from Jorge, a family friend. He went on a joyride with 2 friends and returned the car undamaged to the garage, where its absence had not been detected. Since then, however, Jorge's 14-year-old daughter, Eva, who had gone along for the ride, told her father what had happened. Jorge informed Bill's father, who was now approaching his son. The father has just recently been practicing NVC. "Father, so I hear you, Eva, and Dave took Jorge's car without asking." Bill, "No, we didn't." Father, in a loud voice, "Don't lie to me, it'll only make it worse." Then he remembered to first connect to his own feelings and needs in order to stay in connection with his son. "Father, you just sit there for a moment, I need to think." Going inside himself, he saw how angry and scared he was. Angry when telling himself, Bill should have known better. And, what a liar he's become. Scared when he thinks of all the potential consequences of not only Bill's action, but his own misjudgment of what his son might do. Father, silently to himself, "That was stupid of me to assume he knows better. Someone could have gotten killed in this." Then catching himself, "Oops, I need to translate the labels, stupid, and liar, into feelings and needs. For stupid, I guess the feeling is disappointment in myself. I would have liked to think that I knew him better. And as for liar, I'm feeling pretty scared because I want to be able to count on getting accurate information to deal with this situation." Father, out loud, after silence while he mulls over how to begin talking, "Bill, are you worried that you'd be punished if you gave me accurate information?" Bill, "Yeah, you're always so mean whenever I do anything you don't like." Father, are you saying you'd like more understanding and fair treatment for what you do? Bill, "Oh, sure, like I'm really gonna get fair treatment and understanding from you." Father, silently to himself, "Boy, do I get angry when he says that. Can't he see how hard I'm trying? I really need a little respect for how hard this is, and I guess also a little caring for how scared I'm feeling." Father, out loud to Bill, "Sounds to me like you're worried that no matter what You say, you won't be treated fairly. Bill, what do you care about treating me fairly? When something happens, you just want someone to punish. Besides, what's the big deal? Even if we did take the car, no one got hurt and it's back where it was. I mean, this is no major crime wave. Father, are you scared there'll be harsh consequences if you admit to taking the car, and you want to trust that you'll be treated justly? Bill, yeah. Father, allowing time for silence and the connection to go deeper, what could I do to give you that reassurance? Bill, promise to never punish me again. Father, aware that punishment will not help Bill develop consciousness around potential consequences of his behavior, but will only contribute to greater disconnection and resistance, Bill's father expresses willingness to agree to Bill's request. I'd be open to that agreement if you agree to stay in dialogue with me. That is, we talk until I'm satisfied you're aware of all the possible consequences of your having taken that car. However, in the future, if it happens that I'm not confident that you see the potential danger of what you're in for, I might still use force, but only in order to protect you. Bill, wow, great. It really feels good knowing I'm so stupid you have to use force to protect me from myself. Father, losing touch with his own needs, but silently man, there are times when I could just kill a little. I'm so furious when he says things like that. It really doesn't seem like he cares. Damn, what am I needing here? I'm needing to know, when I'm working this hard, that at least he cares. Father, out loud, angrily, you know, Bill, when you say things like that, I get really pissed off. I'm trying so hard to stay with you on this, and when I hear things like that. Look, I need to know if you even want to keep talking with me. Bill, I don't care. Father, Bill, I really want to listen to you rather than fall into my old habits of blaming and threatening you whenever something comes up that I'm upset about. But when I hear you say things like, it feels good to know I'm so stupid, in the tone of voice you just used, I find it hard to control myself. I could use your help on this. That is, if you would rather me listen to you than blame or threaten. Or if not, then, I suppose my other option is to just handle this the way I'm used to handling things. Bill, and what would that be? Father, well, by now, I'd probably be saying, hey, you're grounded for 2 years, no TV, no car, no money, no dates, no nothing. Bill, well, I guess I'd want you to do it the new way then. Father, with humor, I'm glad to see that your sense of self-preservation is still intact. Now I need you to tell me whether you're willing to share some honesty and vulnerability. Bill, what do you mean by vulnerability? Father, it means that you tell me what you were really feeling about the things we're talking about, and I tell you the same from my end. In a firm voice, are you willing? Bill, okay, I'll try. Father, with sigh of relief, thank you. I'm grateful for your willingness to try. Did I tell you, Jorge grounded Eva for 3 months, she won't be allowed to do anything. How do you feel about that? Bill, oh man, what a bummer, that's so unfair. Father, I'd like to hear how you really feel about it. Bill, I told you, it's totally unfair. Father, realizing Bill isn't in touch with what he's feeling, decides to guess, are you sad that she's having to pay so much for her mistake? Bill, no, it's not that. I mean, it wasn't her mistake really. Father, oh, so are you upset she's paying for something that was your idea to start with? Bill, well, yeah, she just went along with what I told her to do. Father, sounds to me like you're kind of hurting inside seeing the kind of effect your decision had on Eva. Bill, sorta. Father, Billy, I really need to know that you were able to see how your actions have consequences. Bill, well, I wasn't thinking about what could have gone wrong. Yeah, I guess I did. Really screw up bad. Father, I'd rather you see it as something you did that didn't turn out the way you wanted. And I still need reassurance about your being aware of the consequences. Would you tell me what you're feeling right now about what you did? Bill, I feel really stupid, Dad. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Father, translating Bill's self-judgments into feelings and needs, so you're sad, and regret what you did because you'd like to be trusted not to do harm. Bill, yeah, I didn't mean to cause so much trouble. I just didn't think about it. Father, are you saying you wish you had thought about it more and gotten clearer before you acted? Bill, reflecting, yeah. Father, well, it's reassuring for me to hear that, and for there to be some real healing with Jorge, I would like you to go to him and tell him what you just told me. Would you be willing to do that? Bill, oh man, that's so scary, he'll be really mad. Father, yeah, it's likely he will be. That's one of the consequences. Are you willing to be responsible for your actions? I like Jorge and I want to keep him for a friend, and I'm guessing that you would like to keep your connection with Eva. Is that the case? Bill, she's one of my best friends. Father, so shall we go see them? Bill, fearfully and reluctantly, well, okay, yeah, I guess so. Father, are you scared and needing to know that you will be safe if you go there? Bill, yeah. Father, we'll go together, I'll be there for you and with you. I'm really proud that you were willing. Chapter 11. W. The protective use of force. When the use of force is unavoidable. When 2 disputing parties have each had an opportunity to fully express what they are observing, feeling, needing, and requesting, and each has empathized with the other, a resolution can usually be reached that meets the needs of both sides. At the very least, the 2 can agree, in goodwill, to disagree. In some situations, however, the opportunity for such dialogue may not exist, and the use of force may be necessary to protect life or individual rights. For instance, the other party may be unwilling to communicate, or imminent danger may not allow time for communication. In these situations, we may need to resort to force. If we do, NDC requires us to differentiate between the protective and the punitive uses of force. The thinking behind the use of force. The intention behind the protective use of force is to prevent injury or injustice. The intention behind the punitive use of force is to cause individuals to suffer for their perceived misdeeds. When we grab a child who is running into the street to prevent the child from being injured, we are applying protective force. The punitive use of force, on the other hand, might involve physical or psychological attack, such as spanking the child or saying, "How could you be so stupid? You should be ashamed of yourself." The intention behind the protective use of force is only to protect, not to punish, blame, or condemn. When we exercise the protective use of force, we are focusing on the life or rights we want to protect, without passing judgment on either the person or the behavior. We are not blaming or condemning the child who rushes into the street. Our thinking is solely directed toward protecting the child from danger. For application of this kind of force in social and political conflicts, see Robert Irwin's book, Building a Peace System. The assumption behind For application of this kind of force in social and political conflicts, see Robert Irwin's book, Building a Peace System. The assumption behind the protective use of force is that people behave in ways injurious to themselves and others due to some form of ignorance. The corrective process is therefore one of education, not punishment. Ignorance includes 1. A lack of awareness of the consequences of our actions, 2. An inability to see how our needs may be met without injury to others, 3. The belief that we have the right to punish or hurt others because they deserve it, and 4. Delusional thinking that involves, for example, hearing a voice that instructs us to kill someone. Punitive action, on the other hand, is based on the assumption that people commit offenses because they are bad or evil, and to correct the situation, they need to be made to repent. Their correction is undertaken through punitive action designed to make them 1. Suffer enough to see the error of their ways, 2. Repent, and 3. Change. In practice, however, punitive action, rather than evoking repentance and learning, is just as likely to generate resentment and hostility and to reinforce resistance to the very behavior we are seeking. Types of punitive force. Physical punishment, such as spanking, is one punitive use of force. I have found the subject of corporal punishment to provoke strong sentiments among parents. Some adamantly defend the practice, referring to the Bible, spare the rod, spoil the child. It's because parents don't spank that delinquency is now rampant. They are persuaded that spanking our children shows that we love them by setting clear boundaries. Other parents are equally insistent that spanking is unloving and ineffective because it teaches children that, when all else fails, we can always resort to physical violence. Fear of corporal punishment obscures children's awareness of the compassion underlying their parents' demands. My personal concern is that children's fear of corporal punishment may obscure their awareness of the compassion that underlies parental demands. Parents often tell me that they have to use punitive force because they see no other way to influence their children to do what's good for them. They support their opinion with anecdotes of children expressing appreciation for seeing the light after having been punished. Having raised 4 children, I empathize deeply with parents regarding the daily challenges they face in educating children and keeping them safe. This does not, however, lessen my concern about the use of physical punishment. First, I wonder whether people who proclaim the successes of such punishment are aware of the countless instances of children who turn against what might be good for them simply because they choose to fight, rather than succumb to coercion. Second, the apparent success of corporal punishment in influencing a child doesn't mean that other methods of influence wouldn't have worked equally well. Finally, I share the concerns of many parents about the social consequences of using physical punishment. When parents opt to use force, we may win the battle of getting children to do what we want, but, in the process, are we not perpetuating a social norm that justifies violence as a means of resolving differences? Punishment also includes judgmental labeling and the withholding of privileges. In addition to the physical, other uses of force also qualify as punishment. One is the use of blame to discredit another person. For example, a parent may label a child as wrong, selfish, or immature when a child doesn't behave in a certain way. Another form of punitive force is the withholding of some means of gratification, such as parents curtailing allowances or driving privileges. In this vein, the withdrawal of caring or respect is one of the most powerful threats of all. The costs of punishment. When we submit to doing something solely for the purpose of avoiding punishment, our attention is distracted from the value of the action itself. Instead, we are focusing upon the consequences, on what might happen if we fail to take that action. If a worker's performance is prompted by fear of punishment, the job gets done, but morale suffers. Sooner or later, productivity will decrease. Self-esteem is also diminished when punitive force is used. If children brush their teeth because they fear shame and ridicule, their oral health may improve but their self-respect will develop cavities. Furthermore, as we all know, punishment is costly in terms of goodwill. The more we are seen as agents of punishment, the harder it is for others to respond compassionately to our needs. When we fear punishment, we focus on consequences, not on our own values. Fear of punishment diminishes self-esteem and goodwill. I was visiting a friend, the school principal, at his office when he noticed through the window a big child hitting a smaller one. "Excuse me," he said as he leapt up and rushed to the playground. Grabbing the larger child, he gave him a swat and scolded, "I'll teach you not to hit smaller people." When the principal returned inside, I remarked, "I don't think you taught that child what you thought you were teaching him." I suspect what he learned instead was not to hit people smaller than he is when somebody bigger, like the principal, might be watching. If anything, it seems to me that you have reinforced the notion that the way to get what you want from somebody else is to hit them. In such situations, I recommend first empathizing with the child who is behaving violently. For example, if I saw a child hit someone after being called a name, I might empathize. "I'm sensing that you're feeling angry because you'd like to be treated with more respect." If I guessed correctly, and the child acknowledges this to be true, I would then continue by expressing my own feelings, needs, and requests in the situation without insinuating blame. "I'm feeling sad because I want us to find ways to get respect that don't turn people into enemies. I'd like you to tell me if you'd be willing to explore with me some other ways to get the respect you're wanting." 2 questions that reveal the limitations of punishment. Question 1. What do I want this person to do? Question 2. What do I want this person's reasons to be for doing it? 2 questions help us see why we are unlikely to get what we want by using punishment to change people's behavior. The first question is, what do I want this person to do that's different from what he or she is currently doing? If we ask only this first question, punishment may seem effective, because the threat or exercise of punitive force may well influence someone's behavior. However, with the second question, it becomes evident that punishment isn't likely to work. What do I want this person's reasons to be for doing what I'm asking? We seldom address the latter question, but when we do, we soon realize that punishment and reward interfere with people's ability to do things motivated by the reasons we'd like them to have. I believe it is critical to be aware of the importance of people's reasons for behaving as we request. For example, blaming or punishing would obviously not be effective strategies if we want children to clean their rooms out of either a desire for order or a desire to contribute to their parents' enjoyment of order. Often children clean their rooms motivated by obedience to authority because my mom said so, avoidance of punishment, or fear of upsetting or being rejected by parents. NVC, however, fosters a level of moral development based on autonomy and interdependence, whereby we acknowledge responsibility for our own actions and are aware that our own well-being and that of others are one and the same. The protective use of force in schools. I'd like to describe how some students and I used protective force to bring order into a chaotic situation at an alternative school. This school was designed for students who had dropped out or been expelled from conventional classrooms. The administration and I hoped to demonstrate that a school based on the principles of NVC would be able to reach these students. My job was to train the faculty in NVC and serve as consultant over the year. With only 4 days to prepare the faculty, I was unable to sufficiently clarify the difference between NVC and permissiveness. As a result, some teachers were ignoring, rather than intervening in, situations of conflict and disturbing behavior. Besieged by increasing pandemonium, the administrators were nearly ready to shut down the school. When I requested to talk with the students who had contributed most to the turbulence, the principal selected 8 boys, ages 11 to 14, to meet with me. The following are excerpts from the dialogue I had with the students. MBR, expressing my feeling and needs without asking probing questions. I'm very upset about the teacher's reports that things are getting out of hand in many of the classes. I want very much for this school to be successful. I'm hopeful that you can help me understand what the problems are and what can be done about them. Well, the teachers in this school, they fools, man.